good evening to you all. We welcome you all to the Naga Scholars Association monthly event. So, this evening's roundtable talk titled Discoursing the Shifts of the Naga Society in Northeast India is pertinent, urgent. So, in the milieu that we are set up today with an array of influences both from within and without our Naga society, the dynamics of the recurring shifts have to be, I believe, to be documented, studied, analyzed, and make an informed sense of how, where, and when, primarily in the context of an history, heritage, culture, and of our integral identity. And we believe this conversation has to be amplified, and as a space like NSA, perhaps is one active platform where we engage, uh, exchange information, perspective, and engage notes exponentially more so through networks with other intellectual bodies, forums, and institutes. So this conscious participation is what the intellectual Nagas should persist and develop and evolve as a community of people in a more organic manner. It therefore seems timely, to be informed about the wonderful news that the Naga Research Scholars Forum (NRSF) of Hyderabad has successfully released its much-awaited edited collection under the same title as our talk this evening. So, on behalf of the NSA, I take this privileged opportunity to give a heartiest congratulations to NRSF. Congratulations. And we wish and pray that NRSF will continue to witness fruitful and constructive productions as this book is creating interest and positive responses from people, especially the Naga researchers, academics, and intellectuals. And please allow me to welcome the members of the NRSF who are part of the talk this evening. We have the three speakers, and let me briefly introduce them to you. And before that, I will not say much about the book because the members themselves will be discussing on that and many more also. So I would like to first introduce Dr. Riku Kutso. He's extra assistant commissioner based at Futsuru. We say that in short as ESC. Uh, Very something that I want to really uh, emphasize here is that he was the topper of Nagaland civil service exams of 2016 batch. And he did his MA and Phil PhD in history from the University of Hyderabad. His area of interest includes the public sphere, literate modernity, cultural and intellectual history, identity politics, and institutional formations. We next have Mr. Relo Kenye. Kenye, hi. I think you all can see him. So there he is. He's a guest faculty at the Center for Comparative Literature, University of Hyderabad, and also a research scholar at the Highland Institute, Kohima. He recently submitted his PhD thesis at the Department of Cultural Studies, English and Foreign Languages, University, Hyderabad. He is interested in the areas such as the intersections of popular culture and Naga traditional life worlds, Naga writings in English, literature, and social movements, etc. Um, Next, we have Dr. Rongsen Zulu Jamil. Hi, Rongsen again. He is at the moment a postdoctoral fellow at Maharishi Kanat. This is Delhi School of Public Policy and Governance, Institute of Eminence, Delhi University. Zulu, if I may call him Zulu, is interested in natural resource management, traditional knowledge, folklore, social change, and gender. Uh, and we next have Dr. Amihe Su. Because of some technical issue, he may not be able to, he's not able to own he's trying his best, but we're not able to see his face, but there he is by the name Su there. So Amihe has done his PhD from Central University, Hyderabad. His area of interest is post-colonial literature and Naga writing in English. He is self-employed. Very proud to say that he's begun his own startup business. So we wish him the best as well. Yes, and finally we have our moderator, Dr. Monica Kanga Taruba. I must say that Monica has been so prompt in her response. You know, it felt so nice to be engaged with somebody who is so prompt and always on time with all the information that we need. So, Monica, really thank you for that. But at the moment, Monica is an independent researcher, and her area of interest is contemporary British women's poetry, Aboriginal studies, and gender studies as well. So, with this, really welcome all five of you to this talk. And I now hand over the time to Taruba.
Thank you, ma'am, for the generous introduction. And thank you, NSA, for embracing our book with wide open arms. Truly in keeping with your endeavor for academic rigor through interdisciplinary knowledge based interactions, while also extending networks with other intellectual academic forums and institutions. We are humbled by your inclusion and outreach. A special thanks to Madam Elvina for your interest, time, and hard work that you have invested into this program. It didn't really matter whether it was 12:30, midnight, or 1 a.m., she was always right on the spot, working on every single detail to perfection and showering abundant encouragement and support. Thank you, ma'am. We are indebted to you. Um, this book is a manifestation of the fact that the wind of change and shift is blowing against our face, and we are breathing it, whether with suspicion or with wide open nostrils. One of the main objectives that this book has tried to attempt is to engage one into critical thinking about the Naga society in contemporary times in connection with the past, the present, and the future, bringing together scholars from various disciplines and schools from across the country. The book is an outcome of a national seminar that was conducted by the Naga Research Scholars Forum Hyderabad and in collaboration with the Center for Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, University of Hyderabad, that took place in October of 2016. The book has 14 chapters categorized into 6 sections, including the keynote address chapter. So without further ado, we'll get into the program. And as the speakers talk, if you have any questions or doubts, please make a note because we will have the Q&A session once the speakers have all spoken. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Riku.
Thank you, Monica, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, NSA, for giving us this privilege and embracing our humble project and launching it in a very grand manner. We're grateful. We're indebted to our NSA family. The journey of this book began in 2016 with a handful of scholars based in Hyderabad. We also took inspiration from the NSA based in Delhi, and that's how we also wanted to do something, encourage our scholars based in Hyderabad. That's how it started in 2016. Today, we're happy that our thoughts, our efforts came to fruition, and we have this book today. And with those few words, I would like to maybe discuss in brief my small work that I have contributed in this book. We have attempted to do an interdisciplinary approach to study the different changes, the shifts that happened in the Naga society of Northeast India over the course of time. So different scholars have contributed papers from different perspectives and from the different disciplines. My paper engages colonial and American Baptist missionary history, more of an interaction with the Naga history and Naga society over the course of time. So it is titled as Old Sensibilities and New Legitimacies in the Naga society, understanding institutional formations, public sphere, and identity discourse. So I look at how the institutional formations in the society, socio-political, economic, or for that matter, political formations happened in the Naga society over the course of time with the engagement of colonial missionaries and colonial rulers and American Baptist missionaries. So basically, it tries to locate how the Britishers and the American missionaries deliberately anticipated and envisaged a common ideological platform amongst the Naga society, those times called Naga Hills. So from the, maybe mostly from the internal perspective, from the indigenous perspective, colonized perspective, I have tried to locate few perspectives. So I have tried to argue that it was the formation of a common ideological platform by the American Baptist missionaries and the Britishers was done through different colonial and missionary strategies. But I have also argued that it was most importantly done through English education. So by the turn of 20th century, a good number of Nagas were already in schools, in the missionary schools. And also I have also noticed in the sources that we may not call them educated, but they were, Naga kids were thrilled to be literate. They were thrilled to be in schools. No, so that excitement from a small point it started, and it began to expand to villages and slowly to towns. So with these kids and Nagas in schools, a new class of Nagas progressively emerged through the consumption of new cultural goods, through the circulation of American and missionary education, missionary information, values, and other systems. So that's how it, in a lot of ways, ushered in new institutions, new economic bases, and that's how it triggered a process within the society itself to generate changes and shifts. A lot of scholars I have seen have projected Eurocentric paradigms to explain this transformation by saying like liberation from the bondage of savagery, from barbarism. That's how a lot of Naga scholars also, for that matter, even other scholars also have envisaged such paradigms. But I have tried to say that these shifts, the shifts in all the spheres of our Naga society, starting with the education and colonial and missionary engagement with Naga society, these shifts essentially happened not only with the outside forces, but also an interaction with from within also, from within our society also. So varied historical processes, and that's how a lot of new systems and structures brought about by missionaries and colonial rulers, and largely through the interaction between the foreign and the local systems of knowledge, systems of culture, and political systems. That's how changes happened in different spheres of our society. And that's how these processes defined a sort of a vernacular democratic rendering over our socio-political and cultural formations. And importantly, new forms of consciousness in the course of time shaped. My article discusses on how educated class had negotiated a public sphere, a public space. If we look back at our Naga society before the colonial and Christian missionary encounter, I think we could all think of a heterogeneous social, cultural, and political background. And with the emergence of this educated class, the heterogeneous social, cultural, and political setting got streamlined with new networks of communication. And I have seen the importance of English language, because now we speak Nagamese, but in the past, I think it was dominantly English language. And also, yes, we cannot ignore the role of our vernacular, our dialects, But I think the literary language, English language, I think had a very big role to play in bringing our heterogeneous societies, village societies, to what we call Naga today. In my paper, I also try to see how convergent and divergent characters of socio-political formations of the society also took shape. Central to this paper also tries to understand the emergence of collective representation of an identity, of the Naga identity and Naga history. The formation of different institutions like the Naga Club, Naga Hills District Tribal Council, Naga National Council, and ultimately a separate statehood within the Indian Constitution also, I find manifested the evolving public sphere and the political consciousness of the Naga society starting from the American missionary and colonial encounters. In some of the earliest socio-political developments I have also noticed through the encounter with the foreigners, I think most of the lay people, lay scholars, they position the idea of difference, the cultural difference, to the submission of memorandum to the Simon Commission. But prior to that, I have located one document, colonial document, in which some of our Gaon Buras, including the Angami and the Chakisang Gaon Buras, the names I have seen, have submitted they marched to Imphal when the Viceroy of India visited Imphal in 1901, and they submitted one, and they presented to the Viceroy that Naga villages were subject to themselves before the British took over the hills. That was one of the earliest articulation of our identity that I have seen in the colonial sources. And these are the early formations from within our Naga society. And then with the First World War, the World War that happened in the First World War, which happened, engaged Naga people in different capacities. And a lot of Nagas also tried to position that with the Naga Labor Corps, which went to France, and their return brought about the Naga Club, the formation of the Naga Club, which a lot of Naga scholars also try to argue. But from my experience with the sources, I have also tried to argue that, yes, the First World War, after the First World War, Nagas also, a lot of Nagas who went as part of the Labor Corps returned from France also. But I have also seen that most of the signatories of the memorandum were people from around Kohima, were Angamis, were a few of present Zeliangs, like that. And these, as we all know, the two labor corps, one went to France and the other went to quell the Kuki rebellion. I think the people, those people from around Kohima were sent to quell the Kuki rebellion, and the labor corps which went to France were mostly from Sema, Lotha, Rengma, Au, and some colonial transfrontier tribes like the Chang. So I have tried to position an argument by saying that, yes, the role of Naga Labor Corps returnees were important in the formation of the Naga Club, but I think it was a collective endeavor of the emerging class of Nagas, including the English educated, the Dubashis, the Gaon Buras, the government employees, and of course, others, leaders of that time. So in this context, the formation of Naga Club was, in a way, collective articulation of our Naga identity. So uh, and that's how, in a very nation way, I think these leaders somehow uh, articulated the Naga identity and also tries to influence the colonial policies of the colonial state, and also tries to tell to the colonial state the concerns of the Naga people. So I think in a lot of ways, Naga Club, though, could not achieve any remarkable objective except the submission of one memorandum. I think through mobilizing the uh, Naga people leaders of those time, I think a platform as envisaged by the American missionaries and colonial rulers, common ideological platform, common institutional platform, that vision of the American missionaries and colonial rulers, in a lot of ways, Nagas also were able to articulate from their end as well. So I think we see a little bit of overlapping of their vision with the indigenous articulation of identity formation. So during the course of cross-cultural encounter, as we know, when the education and these colonial systems came into the Naga society, few locals, the Nagas, were able to access this education and benefits from the colonial government and its machineries. But I think these few locals who got education slowly departed from the traditional systems in an attempt to embrace colonial modernity. I think in a lot of ways, all of us as scholars, I think we can relate to this experience. I think when our parents got educated, we desire to gain better education. And that's how illiterate parents, the children of illiterate parents, they also endeavor to get education and move closer to modernity, as we call. So the experience I have located in the past of our Naga society, the few educated Nagas who got education, they wanted to depart from our traditional knowledge, traditional society, our systems, and move closer towards the colonial modernity. So at the turn of 20th century, some educated Nagas began to realize these social, cultural, and economic alterations and stood up to assume a sort of paternalistic responsibility over the rest of Naga population, who had not accessed colonial and missionary modernity. So these few educated, I have just talked about the Naga Club, educated these few lot, they began to assume this paternalistic responsibility over the rest of the population, and they tried to articulate welfare of the Naga society, of the Naga people at large. For example, the submission of memorandum to the Simon Commission in 1929. So that's how I think it started. And in so doing so, this educated lot endeavored to draw more and more person from the traditional to the modern domain by taking up teaching, evangelism, and other agencies. And I think this is one of the reasons why teaching and pastoral ministries became very revered in our Naga society in those times. And that's how, in a lot of ways, they became the proponents of Western education in a way, and hybrid cultural ethos to the larger Naga public. I have also in the course of my study, I have also seen that Naga Club, with this load of educated people and leaders, was able to influence the policy of the colonial state also, in the way the 19 Act of 1937, in which Naga Naga Hills district, Lushai Hills, and the North Kachar Hills were reclassified as excluded areas within the province of Assam. I think this was an important role the Naga club played when the Simon Commission visited Kohima. And so this is how the articulation of communitarian welfare and political rhetoric in the Naga public sphere itself was able to influence the colonial state policy in a small way. And after that came the Second World War. And I think with the Second World War, this, I think by the time Second World War happened, the number of educated Nagas also became, in most of the villages, educated Nagas were beginning to come up. And that's how I think the articulation of Naga consciousness became even more intense. And in my paper, with this articulation of identity, consciousness, we have also seen the formation of Naga Hills District Tribal Council in 1945, after which set the platform for NNC. And with the formation of NNC, I have seen a lot of how the articulation of identity consciousness of socio-political formations were institutionalized and legalized through the agency of the NNC. Because during the initial years, formative years of NNC, I think the NNC had representatives from the tribal levels, from the sub-tribal levels, from the village levels. That's how 1:10,000 ratio of representation was maintained, and that's how Naga mass support was garnered by the NNC. And they had this assembly, and where all these leaders come together and discuss issues about Nagas. And slowly,
Sorry for the interruption, Riku. Can we wind up in a minute or so?
I'll come. Yeah, I'll take. Please give me 5 more minutes.
Because we do not have time anymore, actually.
Okay.
During
Okay.
the Q&A, okay, we'll get back to you if that is okay.
Okay. So let me just complete one thought then. The formation of NNC brought legality through the drafting of the constitution. And so I have tried to argue that the constitution of the NNC brought legality to the institutional formations of the Naga society and the articulation of identity. And I think in a lot of ways, the NNC, representative pattern of NNC had underpinned strong democratic formations in the Naga Hills, central to the development of vernacular patterns of political organization and public sphere and space. And this may be influenced by the infusions of universalistic projections of Western democracy, but not necessarily determined by the Western values, or limited by it as well. And I think I'll stop from there and give the time to the other fellow friends.
Thank you, Dr. Riku. I won't say much, and then we'll just move on to Milo. Please take your time.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Monica, and thank you, NSA as well. Riku, but Dr. Riku has already done the formalities, sort of. So I'll just go straight ahead to the book. And before I get into my chapter, I also wanted to highlight some of the other interesting chapters in the book. Of course, we have Monica's The Hands of Christianity on Maram, and 2 other chapters, or 3 other chapters that sort of interested me, where there's this chapter called Towards a Proscenium Aesthetic, How Christianity Reshaped the Our Tradition of Wawamana. I think I got the pronunciation right, but here, this chapter is by Talidula. She talks about how this performative aspect of Wawamana, which is set in the traditional cultural ethos of the Aus, got reconfigured over the course of time when Christianity came to the Au land, and the whole performative practice of this comic tradition or this comic aspect of Wawamana underwent changes with the eventual encounter with Christianity. So that is one interesting chapter, and another one is food and kingship among the Kuzami Naga. this chapter is by Dr. Akhono Sakre. Here she talks about the transaction of food in the traditional cultural setting again, and how this transaction of food, especially done by the youngsters and given to the elders, helps in building this kind of kinship. And one of the central issues that she discusses here is on this idea of biological kinship and cultural traditional kinship. So she discusses and problematizes that and discusses that in her chapter, which is also very interesting. And then we also have other chapters in the economic domain as well. And for example, we have migration and modernity of the Konyaks of Nagaland, where in Amongla, the contributor talks about migration as a livelihood strategy for the Konyaks, and also as an articulation and manifestation of modernity. So a few of the many interesting chapters in the book. And my chapter is titled Reading Factions in Fiction, a critical appraisal of select literary works on the impact of factional violence in Naga society. So this chapter is under the section Literature, Identity and Shifts. So what I have attempted in my chapter is I try to argue that there is an absence of discourse in this very important domain of Naga political history, and that is the impact of factional violence on the lives of the common people in Naga society. And I also go on to argue that literature serves as a possible space for articulating and expressing the plight and the lived experiences of the people. And in the process, I have brought in select literary works by Esterin Kire, Peter Wormwood, and her novella Life on Hold, and Birendra Kumar Bhattacharya's Laugh in the Time of Insurgency, which actually is a translation. And I've also briefly discussed Temsala Au's Sony. It's a short story from her collection, Lebanon for My Head. So what I try to do in this paper is I see literature as not just what it is, but what it does. So in that sense, I try to talk about literature not just in the ontological sense, but in its functional sense. So not just what it is, but what it does. And literature as a space for a way of doing history in highlighting the lived experiences of the people, as I have said. And the central question, if I can put it, is in the chapter is on this question: who are the legitimate stakeholders of the Naga national or the Naga political movement? So all these literary scholars have dealt with the impact of factional violence, the trauma left by the internal rivalries, the violent rivalries amongst the so-called Naga armed political groups. So I try to argue that there has been a sense of a growing sense of disinterestedness, if I can use it that way, and anxiety mostly amongst youngsters towards the Naga national movement, which Esterin Kire calls as something that began as a noble cause, but one that has metamorphosed into a mind game. So I think that is more or less about what my chapter is. So yeah, I think we can go ahead with the next presenter, Dr. Zulu. Yeah.
Yes. I hope my voice is audible.
Was Monica supposed to intervene in between? Sorry.
No, not at all. Please carry on.
Okay. Firstly, I would like to thank the Naga Scholars Association for inviting me. And I also extend my immense congratulations to NRSF family for making me a part of this momentous occasion. And a warm hello to all of you present here. The title of my chapter is Lore, Local Knowledge and Status, an anthropological view on Naga land and resources. So this is a result of my fieldwork in two villages of Mokshong district, namely Longwisa and Longkong village. Before going any further, I would like to take a short time about explaining about why I didn't use the term indigenous knowledge, or why I didn't use the term indigenous itself. As we all know, the renowned term indigenous, without giving a long statement, it generally denotes to a people of ethnic origins which inhabit a geographical region. The UN also emphasized for a fundamental self-identification of so-called indigenous groups for an added practical and purposive term. And because this term indigenous in practice in our studies is often associated with all memories of power violation, of destroy and exploitation, especially in the hands of colonial rulers. Thus, for the current paper, I have tried to encompass the knowledge system that these two villages have, devoid of how the knowledge have originated, devoid of the political territory of the villages, and I have referred to it as local knowledge. This local knowledge signifies a set of knowledge that the people possess on their nature understanding, the conceptualization of the world that they see, and how they order the world around themselves. Resources are never simple, but they are produced, they are used, and they are given meanings by social and political relationships. We all know that. Folklore, in this regard, among the Aonagas, it function as a justification and explanation about things around themselves, or they function as an educative tool, which talks about a deeply woven rituals, the topography, and even the institutions that they are a part of. Land in this paper, for most of our communities, they signify the beginning of human form, and similarly, we all return back to the land. So the Nagaland Village and Area Council Act of 1978, it gives administrative power and duties at the local level. Aunakas follow a republic system of elected council members called as the Pudumandan, which manage, governed, and which looks after the resources that they have, which I call local cultural institutions, or the LCI or LCIS. Now, the land ownership among the Aonaga, if we examined, the pattern that was reflected was that we have common village land, we have clan land, we have lineage land. Within the clan itself, we have the lineage land, which is separate from the clan land, and private lands. So certain, also what I've found out is that certain land are mortgaged, both at clan and also at individual level, which also reflects the possibility of changing ownership with regard to land. The next section, in the next session, I talk about how the people are associated with the land. So there is this deep and powerful association of the people with land, which is reflected in the oral tradition, in the form of myths, memory, customs, kin relationships, and even in morality, and on how to behave among themselves and how to behave with the nature. Landscape, as a result of this, turned into ancestral tracks which attach history. We have sacred sites and mythical topographical mapping. Mythical topographical map. Land, thus acting as a repository for the history of the group of people, and also for the individual himself or herself. The status of a person before the Christianity was equated and determined by the number of plot of land that the person owns, and the manpower he have to work in the gym field, the more elevated he was regarded in terms of his status. This notion, however, is changing as my studies suggest, and according to one of my informant, he states, granaries are useless, education is important. Selling off the land would not sustain for more than 10 years. It is just enough for only a brief period of time. I don't have much to say. As you read it, you will get to know more about it. And I concur that this is a work in progress. This is a work done during my PhD days, so there is a lot of loopholes. I'm ready to take your criticism and your suggestions. So to conclude, I would like to leave all of you with another statement from another informant. And he wisely said to me, he said, land will rotate, so does its wealth. We are owners for only a brief period of time. Resources are gift of God, and we are masters over them. Unfortunately, we do not replace it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zulu, and for taking enough of time and yet within time. We now invite Amihi to share with us his paper.
Good evening to all the wonderful people gathered here today. Am I audible? All right. I'm so sorry. I have been trying, but for some reason I cannot get the video to work on my system, which is a good thing because there's nothing to look at anyway. So this is an incredibly diverse collection of the most, knowledgeable and informed minds of our society right now. I'm so grateful to be a part of it, and thank you to the NSA for that. The book that, for some of us who have it with us, this is the culmination of the efforts of the NRSF, and now that it has seen the light of day, I can, only look back at the many sleepless nights the team went through to organize the seminar, the headaches, the fights, the arguments, the joys, everything. And this is the collective effort of each and every one of us. The Naga scholars at Hyderabad, which helped make it happen. Of course, it goes without saying that while our names are on the cover or in the book, it is the sweat and labor of our friends which allowed it to come to fruition. So I'm very, very grateful to all of my friends over there. Now, my contribution to the book is a small chapter that tries to look at the identity construction of the Naga people. This was a seminal idea which formed the basis of my hypothesis for my research work. Now, I will not be dwelling too much on the textual material because I would like to believe that at some point or the other, we will all have a copy in our hands. So I'm advertising it a bit. What I will try to deliberate on today is the thought process that guided me and provoked me to work on this area. Now, growing up as a child, I never once questioned the need. I'm sorry. Was this?
I'm here, carry on, yeah.
Okay. So I never questioned the idea or the notion of my Naganas, right? It was intrinsically who I was, and everyone around me was the same. And of course, we would think of ourselves along the lines of tribes or other small groupings like family, village, so on and so forth. But at no point of time did I ever consider that the idea of Naga people was not historically or sociologically accurate. Now, we all know that in present times, the Naga identity is still in a state of flux. And apart from the socio-political, economic challenges that we are facing as a society, we're also facing a wall when it comes to negotiating Naga identity with the contemporary, urban, modern global society. And that being said, all of these things being said, we can argue that the Naga people, we have come to embrace the notion have claimed ownership of the Naga identity, notwithstanding all of these inherent challenges. Now, historically or sociologically, and I think our friends in the social sciences will attest to this, Naga people lived as small village republics, each with their own societal structure, more or less independent of other villages. There may have been tribal ties connecting them with other villages, especially if they were from the same tribe. But generally speaking, the tribe was the highest extent to which any villager felt any degree of belonging in relationship to other people. So this othering was quite prevalent, in fact, and the supra-tribal identity, this beyond the Sema, Ao, Lotha, Angami, Rengma, whatever, this supra-tribal identity, the Naga, was something that came out of reference. For example, we have the Ahom kingdom or the Manipuri kingdom who would, for example, use their own terms to signify the Naga people. But this was also largely in reference to the tribes along intersecting regions like, say, the Angami, Ao, Lotha, and Chakasang to some extent. because these people had a greater degree of interaction with the surrounding kingdoms. And there are also numerous theories that try to find the root of the Naga term. But if we look at all of these theories, one thing really stands out, which is that the Naga people themselves have no distinct term, etymologically speaking, which is rooted in their languages and in their dialects, which hint at the term Naga. So the logical conclusion is that the idea of Naga is clearly external, right? Now, one of the major directions I took in the chapter is that the colonial documents and materials left to us have deeply impacted the development of this Naga identity. All the historical facts indicate that the British, in their attempts to consolidate the frontier territories, ended up having significant interactions with the Naga people. Their administrative policies, infrastructural developments caused a shift in the societal structure, for example, the village republics, and it pushed them into urban spaces, replacing traditional power with new ones, which were derived from colonial authority. Now, that meant that the inherently antagonistic relationship between these two people, the Nagas and the colonizers, caused the colonial forces to use, punitive forces, punitive policies, aggressive moves in order to subjugate the powerful village societies and their fiercely independent nature. So not only was this colonial rhetoric used to justify the use of blatant force, it also tried to glorify the reduction of the rich Naga culture and customs to a homogeneous modern society or culture as a positive move, right? So obviously there were benefits that came out of it, and the trajectory that followed as a result of this contact between the colonial forces and the Naga people, there were positive developments out of it. But by and large, the shifts that these tribal societies experienced eroded much of their culture and identity. So the negative representation that the Naga people experienced in many of these colonial documents was one of the biggest detriments, which is what I try to say in this in my chapter. And the glorification of the warrior culture, for example, between the glorification of this warrior culture, for example, was one of the things that caused a shift, a break between the Nagas and the outside world. And it was quite obvious when you think about it, because they are coming as aggressors. They're trying to take over customary land, right? And the freedom-loving culture of the Naga people was portrayed as an extension of the Naga people's savagery and barbarism, for example. And without a doubt, if you think about it, the Western societies were culturally and technologically ahead of the Naga people, right? These societies obviously had thousands of years of civilization upon which they stood. And if you actually look and study the history of the English people alone, their ancient history and the warmongering ways would put any ancestor of these so-called headhunters to shame. So the descriptions of the Naga people in these colonial documents, they shifted from being descriptions and evolved into a construction of Naga identity. So what I'm looking at in my in this paper is the genesis of the construction of Naga identity, and I put a lot of the emphasis on the colonial texts. To put it short, we now live in perhaps the most peaceful time in the history of the Naga since we came into contact with the outside world. The exponential growth of intellectuals and scholars trying to represent and understand the depth and breadth of our Naga culture and history is testament to the changes that are taking place in our own society. Now, in the paper that I wrote, the focus is obviously on literature because I'm from a literary background, even though my research eventually took a very interdisciplinary approach. The literature that comes from these Naga authors, I argue, consciously or inadvertently through their work, push the paradigm shift forward. They take pride in the culture and values inherited through the ages. They take the effort to educate readers into the nuances of Naga customs, a sense of belonging, of contentment in the idea that there is nothing shameful in being Naga. I wouldn't refer too much to the textual material that is mentioned there, but at the end of the day, the belief and the motivation that pushed me towards writing these works that found its place in my research is that incremental changes may happen as a result of these literary exercises, and this could possibly filter across and spread across to various spheres. It's also possible that the changes that are reflected in literature could very well be a result of the need of the Naga people to reclaim ownership of their identities. Regardless of the genesis of this development, we do understand that there is a shift taking place in the various spaces and spheres of influence in our society. And I am grateful to the NSA for their proactive engagement with our publication and for advocating the need to push these kind of discourses into public spheres. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amihi. I would now like to invite Dr. Vio, who was the keynote speaker for our national seminar that happened in 2016. And since then, he has held us by the hand, supporting us, encouraging us, and we are very grateful to him. And he is also the person who has been instrumental in introducing the NRSF to NSA. And without him, this program, I think, wouldn't have seen the light of day. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Monica, for those gracious words. Let me start by congratulating the editors and also, of course, the larger body of NRSF Hyderabad for bringing out a very valuable book. And I must say that this is an important, contribution to the need for engagements that are there currently in our society. And I think in the recent times, we've seen few books that have come to the scene. And I'm happy to see that, Naga scholars from different areas, not necessarily through the NSA, but in different forums have been able to bring out these ways of trying to engage discourses and initiating conversations, which are important for us to move on and also think critically about our own society. And yes, of course, I would back Amihe there and say that, everybody should get a copy of this, even though, of course, I haven't got one. I'm told that Monica has already, tracked where the book is currently for Delhiwalas. So hopefully Delhiwalas also will be getting, but I trust that, the editors will inform us where all the book is available, whether it's in Nagaland or how in online mode, whether they are available for readers. That being said, Monica said that I was part of the seminar, and yes, the seminar was very special to me because this was my first keynote address. In fact, I was not very sure when they sent me the invitation. In my academic career, that was my first keynote address, and 2006, and of course from then on, I think I've also matured much more. I was, but then after that engagement, I was so happy to see a bunch of young people, or as Elvina put it, a gang of scholars from Hyderabad, who were quite diverse in the discipline, and yet quite united to talk about issues which are very much around that our society need to engage with. And I'm so happy to be in touch with these young people. Many of them have been very much in close contact with me, working on different projects. And I'm so happy that many of them have already moved on to take on jobs or contribute to the society in different ways. So I've, like Monica said, I've seen the journey, and I've also seen their wait for the book to come to the public domain. Been such a painful journey too. But nevertheless, I think something that always is a long wait is also worth holding it and cherishing it at the end of the day. Now, let me start with one incident that happened while I was traveling to Hyderabad. In fact, very interestingly, the day I was traveling to Hyderabad was 13 October, and that day happened to be the announcement for the Nobel Prize for Literature of 2016. And for whatever reason, Bob Dylan won the prize, right? We all know, and the controversies around it, people were happy, some people were upset, and all those sort of things. But then that, of course, in my keynote address also, I mentioned this, that how relevant Bob Dylan's words were, written in the 1960s, that famous song we all know, Blowing in the Wind, which becomes so much something which I thought about. And I was traveling and thinking about and musing on that song, because many of those that he was articulating, the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind, became very strongly a word, phrase that came to me, because for what we see in our society, even today, the answer is really blowing in the wind. It's just that, we are either ignoring it or we are not just engaging with them. And that's why when I was talking to them, I said that, I would like us to engage with some of the dominant narratives and perhaps even demystify them, because we have somehow swallowed some of these things, whether we like it or not, sometimes with uncritical minds. And we have been going through very critical junctures of different phases in different historical moments for us too. And I trust that even right now, as we all are, logging into this program, we are able to see that we are actually going through a phase which is helping us to think about what could have been done, or what is happening, and what may be done better if it was done better in the past. Yesterday, I was also in another lecture by Dolly Kikan, and I think many of you were also there. A Journey from the Heart. It's about the repatriation of Naga ancestral remains, and how, and sort of, woke up our conscience to how our, artifacts, the Naga artifacts, have been so much part of the museums. And yet, of course, whether we, you partly agree with it or, not agree with it, lots of things that helps us rethink about where our narratives are looking at. And I think sometimes our uncritical minds and even scholarship in that sense, which I always felt that we need to look at it, engage with it critically, because this uncritical thinking is often leading us to wrong directions sometimes. And I suggest that perhaps we need to look at many of the narratives which have been not so much engaged with, maybe in a scholarly way, or maybe in a way which everybody can think through and contribute to. But I feel, and I'll just point out one dominant narrative which is currently still there, which is that, many people, many among the Nagas, and Nagas are very political. We all would agree this, that we perhaps would be one of the most political people groups currently in the world. Everything around us, and you see the social media, everybody comes to life, especially men comes to life when it comes to political issue. Elsewhere, they are absolutely silent, and anything that is there. But anything political, on Naga issue, they suddenly come alive as though, something has hit them. But again, I think what is happening is that we somehow, at the back of the mind, think that a political solution will bring to an end to all the evils that are there in a society. And I think that's a very wrong analogy, assumption. Yes, we have lots of presumptions that we live by. But I think if we imagine that one day, if the political solution comes tomorrow, everything else that we see in a society will fall in place. That sort of belief, I think, is too lame for us to believe in. And unless we start engaging in issues that are there in our societies, and I'm so glad that this book gives interdisciplinary areas to engage with. And so not just in anthropology or social history or literary studies, perhaps we also, of course, some of them also engaged on environmental issues, the sciences that we look at. And look at our society. The agricultural sector is very much in need of critical thinking, and we have not quite done it. The labor economy, we all complain. We are perhaps better off complaining than really bringing in some ideas to bring for a solution. Look at our own society. We have the labor force in our society is mostly non-Nagas, and especially in towns and cities where we look at. And yet, where are our young people? Where are our youth? How do we look at these things and step forward? Unless we become a participant of the issues that are there at hand in our society, I think our engagement should not be just intellectual. Our engagement should enable us to move into the society and see how best we can contribute towards the progress. And when we talk about the progress, we have different notions of what all these things can, encompass. But I think for us to be realistic, our engagement should actually place us in certain sort of discomfort level, because we cannot just be quite individualistic and saying, I'm done, I'm well off, I can get along with life. But see the pains in a society where we can really engage. Not everybody can actually be so much politically engaged. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be politically engaged. Please don't take me there. I'm very much of the opinion that we should bring a quicker solution as far as possible. But not everybody need not put their heads there. All of us, and sometimes I think it is the people who are contributing elsewhere, whether it's in entrepreneurship or whether it's in agricultural sector, or sort of things that are often relegated as lesser, or lesser importance, that actually are greater contribution to the society. And unless we look at those things, especially because we are from oral culture, the oral culture very much is in need of intervention at this time. And our older generation is passing away without much of us being able to go and engage with. When I look at my own setting, my village, there are hardly any older people. My grandparents' generation virtually are gone. I mean, only a few. And those few actually may not actually also be able to have complete knowledge of the whole knowledge database that our community is, being able to really think about. So I think the need for us to engage on these issues are critical in our society. And that's where I think a book like this, which we are now talking about, should help us to actually navigate our ways into different angles, different avenues, different disciplines, and not just, stop talking soon after we, stop this webinar or this program. So thank you once again, and for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. If anybody has any queries also, you may put forward. Either you can turn off your mic and ask, or you can also type in the chat box. To start off, I was just thinking over Servio's content in his chapter, where he says that the need to record our knowledge arises rudely, or people wake up rudely only at the research level. And I think that is very true and yet very painful. And also he talks about cultural theft. Sorry, if you can elaborate a little on that, and then maybe talk to the audience about it. And also the primacy of written literature over oral literature.
Maybe we should let people read that. But yeah, I mean, just to give a brief thoughts on your points. I think I think this is the experience with all of us, at least this generation of Naga scholars, who suddenly come to a conscious awakening of the need to actually critically look at our own society. We have all grown up with a set of education theories that does not really fit in our own society. So we grew up not studying anything about our culture. And perhaps many of us today in this generation would be knowing about America or Korea more than our Naga culture, because those influences are so high. And I also grew up much of it in the same way as it was. But I'm happy, when I, a couple of times I went back to Nagaland and visited some colleges. I must tell you that there have been few colleges who are actually trying to invoke a sense of responsibility among students and also look into our own society. So we need to start early for us, this should be a pointer for us that we cannot afford to let our children, be of the same level as where we actually woke up to a cultural consciousness. And I think that is where I think we need to start introducing our children to cultures and things which can really look at. And the second point I think is also written and the oral, right? Monica, you were saying? Yeah. So I think, again, our education system has kind of a flaw in the sense that because we are from an oral society, much of what we think of education is the written. And so giving a primacy of the written over the oral is actually quite damaging, because now, of course, we can agree on the fact that the oral is much as important as the written. And in fact, if you read, somebody like Walter Ong, he would continue, argue to say that, the written has not existed without the oral, but the oral has existed always without the written. So when we talk about which is a greater importance, impact to the society, I think it becomes an issue which we have not quite looked at. And so our oral culture, the importance of looking at our oral culture, and not just relegating it as, our people in the village as uneducated, that sort of connotation we try to identify people in the village, uneducated. So the whole notion of education needs to be deconstructed to, kind of include what education should mean. And education, therefore, should, have all sorts of all-round understanding of what culture should imbibe. And I think for us, the whole notion of Morung and other things have largely come into our discourses. But what can Morung today, the idea of Morung, with its own transformed ideas, can come and become a part of our engagement? Perhaps we need to really think through it. It cannot certainly, because of the change of time, cannot certainly be replicated as it functioned maybe 50, 100 years back, because many things have changed. And like all societies, Naga societies also change. But there could be other ideas that really can come in different forms and shapes to help us move on and critically rethink about these things. So I think, again, it will be a sort of critically looking back into our own society, our own selves, and perhaps engage along that way.
Thank you, sir.
May I ask a question? Am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes, you are, madam.
Okay. Yes, and thank you so much, all the four speakers. You have spoken so well. Me to read the book. Monica, I hope you reserve one for me. In advance, I'm booking one copy. Yes. I think I have to really read all your works. The articles that you have written there for the book. But it's just out of curiosity more than anything else that I will just place this perhaps to anyone. Anyone, one of you can respond to it, or perhaps all of you. When we were doing that research and we also put the piece of writing in the book, I'm just curious to know, right, the shifts that you talk about, like in your perception or in your research, like what are some of the good productive changes that our people need to really take it forward, and this you would recommend as a scholar that okay, this is good for our people. So I am just curious that if you can share with, some of your findings. I hope I'm clear.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
So one of the findings which I found out in the paper is the importance of sustainability to the nature. By that I mean, in one of the field villages where I did my field work, in 1960s, the Khan was introduced, Kardosh, right? So when the first Khan come to the village from Kolkata, you had a species of monkey called Urisumu. I'm not sure about the scientific name about it. I think it's a species of langur. So this species was totally wiped out. Now, after some few years, after this species have been completely wiped out, you also have certain species of fishes, right? Due to over exploitation of the resources, they are also put into certain kind of danger. Now, I wanted to talk about this because what I noticed is that there has been this shift of ideology of how they look at nature, mostly with respect to the importance given to what they can take and how much they can take. So in one of the village, there has been certain rules given by the village councils, saying that if there is a big game, 10,000 rupees fine will be there, or if it is a breeding season, then the use of of catapults and air guns are banned in the village, or the use of chemicals in the rivers are banned. So I think we all learned the hard way, one way or the other. So and even with our resources, land, the species in the land itself, I think we all learned the hard way, and the people have come to realize about the importance about it. Although there is still a need to check on the greediness of the people, on the selfishness of the people, but as a community, I think we have realized it. Thank you.
Thank you, Zulu. Rilo, Riku, Amihe, would you like to come in?
May I interject? So when we talk about shifts that have taken place in society, this is a positive shift that I think has taken place in our society. I was talking about how Naga intellectuals are making a move towards critical thinking and trying to bring that into public space. And over the past, I think you could say, 5 years, there has been an exponential growth in the publication of works from local authors, and the kind of spaces that they're getting to express literary thoughts, or even the expression of cultural consciousness, like Servio process. So I think this is one of the most significant changes that have taken place in recent times. Speaking purely from a literary standpoint, and it's interesting how before, and this comes back again to what was discussed before. Before, pursuing research as a serious thing, it didn't really occur to me, and I'm sure this is something that a lot of young people navigate and negotiate with. But with the development of and the birth of many avenues from which they can publish works, or put down into writing the oral heritage of their people, I think this is one of the most significant changes that has taken place. One of the best shifts that I've seen as having literature as a repository of our own culture, which I think would benefit us all in the future. So that is one shift that I've noticed. Of course, there are so many other things, but off the top of my head, that's the one thing that I can think of.
Okay, let me just take a short time. I think the very medium of exchange communication that we're having today in our meeting, as most of us, I believe, are Nagas, and today the language we speak, the medium of communication in English, I think this also reflects one of the biggest shifts, cultural shifts in our society. From our own local dialects to now, we are more comfortable with English. So I think this is one big signifier of our shifts that we can locate from the past. And the statehood that we have today, this is based on my findings. So the statehood that we have today, I think is also one of the, big shifts that we have experienced. And also, I think the political consciousness, the identity consciousness, all these ideological, socio-political formations, which began since late 20th century and to this day, I think over the experiences with colonial rulers, with the American Baptist missionaries, and to our Naga articulation of identity consciousness, and today under this Indian state, I think the articulation of experiences and shifts, I think, are all different. And I think it has been conditioned, our experiences have been conditioned under different circumstances also. And I think in this way, I think the changes and the shifts that we're experiencing today, I think has a lot of relation with our, I think we still can relate to our all communitarian sensibilities, our traditional systems. And also, I think at the same time, our new identity that we have today, the changes, the language we speak, the cultural changes, the religion we follow, I think all these changes, the shifts, although have gained new legitimacies and political, religious, and cultural outlooks under diverse experiences, I think we are still, in a lot of ways, rooted to our old communitarian sensibilities and traditional systems. And I think through this small work, I think we could locate dual kind of a personality in the Naga society. And I think this is one big shift through my short study of our history, tries to locate the present Naga identity. Thank you.
Ma'am, did we kind of answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Any other questions coming from? Relo would like to add anything?
Okay, more like maybe general perspective, following on what Dr. Riku was just saying. I think his chapter, for instance, have also sort of given us this avenue to critically rethink on the existing discourses and literatures on Naga studies. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is largely it has been post-colonial in framework, and in that sense, we have sort of bashed the colonial intervention and the Christian missionary left and right and from all angles. And I think I'm not saying that that is not how it should be or not that, but I think the example of English as enabling public sphere and therefore some kind of collective consciousness can also be seen as some kind of example in reconfiguring or our orientation towards colonial intervention in some sense. This there's a very fine line in what I'm trying to address here, but we can also sort of think from that perspective is what I'm trying to say. And as far as my chapter is concerned, what I have also seen is there is so much of like internal self criticism in the writings of these literary figures, in the sense that as much as we have been talking about being suppressed and subjected by a dominant other, our literary figures have also frankly and poignantly brought out the internal strife and issues that we are encountering with on a daily basis. So literature has like sort of provided that space for us to do some kind of self-reflection and examination. So in that sense, it's a nuanced one, but I also feel that these are like small, big things. And with the exception of Dr. Vio, I was also, towards the end of my chapter, I've also mentioned that all these literary figures have been, or the Naga writers in English that we have today are like predominantly women. And they have been able to express and represent our voices in such a powerful way. So I have sort of added that observation also. That doesn't really align with the question, but just wanted to add that observation too.
Somebody has posed a question. Should I read the question or what is the influence of memories among the Nagas in creating contemporary Naga society? I guess any one of you can answer this question.
Amihe, or if we also can come in.
Actually, you should also respond, Monica. You are you are one of the editors, and you are, a contributor, and also. So I think you are quite capable. We would like to hear your response on that. But I think memory plays a big deal because we are largely, even today, oral society, and oral societies' memories are our story banks, and we have so much to understand about how things were of the past, and largely our oral narratives are based on memories, right? Even though, of course, there needs to be a lot of checks and balances even in the stories too, but I think without memories we are not a people in that sense. Yeah, so Amihe and Monica can also share.
As Dr. Savio said, without memories, maybe we are not a people, yes. And I'm just going back to my high school days when I would read Victorian novels, for example. And the only thing that I could understand very clearly was Oliver Twist saying, "I'm hungry. Please give me some more." Maybe because I was in the convent, and therefore sometimes we feel hungry, and that is what I could connect with. And but to understand another community's literature is quite difficult. And yes, now that we have so much of Naga literature, more interlaced with myths and folk tales and memories that we no longer talk about in our house, I think it becomes very important. But at the end of the day, there is also a question, which in a way I'm not answering to the question, but also a question within the question now. How remote are we from the myths and folk tales that are told or that are written out? Because just as we read, the British literature or American literature, that we find it hard to connect with, are we as Nagas able to connect with the myths and folktales and legends of the past, and somehow try to find a connect? And that is one question that I wanted to put forward to Emihe also, because his chapter dealt with that. And so it's again a question leading to another question to Emihe. If you can answer that, please.
Thank you, Monica, for passing the hot potato to me. The influence of memory among the Nagas in creating contemporary Naga society. Now, I mentioned this in the short talk that I gave earlier, where the question of Naga people being disconnected from their own history and their own heritage. So for a people who are trying to reaffirm their identity, the sense of who we are, the sense of what we are, is it's you cannot underplay the importance of memory in that sense. For us to be able to revisit, reestablish, and reaffirm and understand our identity, the as a people, that's where memory comes in. And it's not only in these stories and these myths and these legends. It's all the small things that build up to making a society. And that's how I think. In a way, when you think about it, a people without a history, they don't have roots. So for people like the Naga people who are trying to, understand and come to terms with who they are, where we are in the world, memories play a very, very significant and important part. I don't really know if I properly answered that, but I think that would be my take on it.
Yeah, can I jump in?
Sure, sure.
Please, please.
Yeah, I was just reminded of Servio's novel actually, and in the context of our discussion on memories, I've also been discussing with some of our friends that as far as our elders and their generation have been concerned, they have gone through this. For example, the trauma and they faced during the 50s and the 60s through the Indian Armed Forces torturous atrocities, and for them that have always sort of impacted them and continue to remain fresh in their memories. But as far as us or the younger generation are concerned, it's something like we only hear about and not something that we have lived. So bringing in from this angle of memories, I was also, in my chapter, I've talked about this growing sense of disinterestedness amongst the youngsters towards the Naga political movement. So there is a nuanced thing there where the elders have lived and seen the atrocities, and therefore the memories are still fresh, and the sense of intensity in their vigor and their vigor in this has been is still strong. But whereas for us, the whole dynamics and scenario have changed over the years. So I think we can also look at memory from that angle. That is on the political part, and I also have one example from the cultural domain. That is, during my field work, I met a village elder, and my area, my villages border the Umai villages, the Manipur border. So this elder was saying that in the past, during festivals, villagers used to go and there used to be some kind of competition and celebration where these Kheja, Chagisang villages go to a certain Umai village and they sing together folk songs. And there was always this vibrant cultural interaction then. But with the coming of the modern nation state and the creation of political boundaries, that like suddenly stopped, and that practice is no longer there. So for them, the whole community still goes back to such kind of memory and the larger Naga collective and their association with each other. But now, because of the modern system and state, modern nation state structure in which we live, such kind of cultural interactions and dynamics have also been significantly affected. So that old man was talking about his past experiences and stuff like that. So I think just examples, but reinforcing the idea of memories as important in constructing the modern Naga collective. Yeah.
Also, if I can pitch in just one point. I think the way I look at memory into two types. One is in the sense of a personal memory, and also in terms of the second in terms of community memory. So when you try to understand these two memories, when you try to understand this memory, you will also come across situations where these two are very different and also quite similar also at the same time. So I think as researchers, what I try to do mostly, because memory is a section of the knowledge system which is fast changing ever time and again, and it is influenced by so many factors. So the social change, understanding the social change itself is also very important when we try to understand the concept of memory or the memory itself. So I think one of the reason how we can check is conducting focus group when we are trying to collect data on memory. So I think that is one way to go about it. It has proven quite helpful for me so far, and I think that can be one takeaway that we can all take. Thank you.
Elvina ma'am, do we wind up or what do we do now? We take one more question.
Yes. If nobody wish to ask a question, perhaps we can wind up. Uh, right. Is that so? Anybody wish to ask a question, please? Looks like nobody wants to ask a question. I think I think they're not going through a process. Whatever they have gained from this talk. So before we wind up, I would like to request Dr. Tobemo Sanglo. He's the Joint Secretary of NSA, to kindly give a vote of thanks. And perhaps before Tom Cho comes, if I may request all the people here to kindly on your camera, as the tradition of NSA since it's online. Would like to take a quick photo if you would really oblige us by on your camera.